BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Thanks for downloading this episode of Radio 4's Open Country podcast, a series that brings you fascinating stories from every corner of the UK countryside. We hope you enjoy it.
When I was a boy, my grandfather and father used to bring me up here, which is Newlands Corner, between Dorking and Guildford. And they would say, this is the finest view in England. And it really is a corker. If you like hills and trees and distant prospect of the Weald and maybe the South Downs and maybe even in some lights, the English Channel. This really is a wonderful view. And I was told this is what landscape should look like. That is England. Turned out not to be entirely true, but that's what they told me when I was a boy, here at Newlands Corner. And I've come to the Surrey Hills for this week's Open Country, to meet people who have musical and sound reactions to this particular landscape. Not all of them English.
I was offered a full scholarship when I was 12 years old, and I was very fortunate to be able to come to the Menuing School in Cobham, in Surrey, and that's the first time I stepped into this beautiful landscape.
I am in the Surrey village of Shere, and it's a huge pleasure to meet the concert pianist Wu Qian. Ni hao.
Ni hao.
That's it. That's all I've got. Where did you come from?
Came from Shanghai.
Right.
So as you can imagine, growing up in the 80s and early 90s, so people from Shanghai were considering from the big metropolitan city, and countryside for us are usually for little villagers, farmers. And so when I first arrived into Heathrow, I remember, and a driver picked me up. He was driving, was for still quite a bit of time, 45 minutes to 1 hour. And all I could see was countryside, just never-ending green, and there was no big houses or tall buildings. I was very scared. I was thinking, where is he taking me? Because I had no idea England was like that. I thought, it's probably much better than Shanghai, in many ways. And then, of course, after a few years living in Surrey, then I realized actually countryside for the British are like somewhere you could actually relax and able to have the luxury to escape from the city. So it was, to me, was a big shock at the time.
Whereas for me, Shanghai is still the most terrifying place I've ever been. And is clearly the future. Shanghai's the future. And this is like the past. So what made you want to start a music festival here in this kind of, sort of alien place, in a way? As far away as from Shanghai as it's possible to be, in a way.
You see, because it was a Menuing School, it's a boarding school. So I lived there, grew up there for 5 years. When you live in a place for that long time, you do feel it's your second home. And after graduating the Royal Academy of Music, I felt I wanted to bring what I have learned back to where the school and also the local people, the society, was so supportive to my education. I wanted to bring what I have learned back to the people from here.
The chalk hills of the North Downs, mostly covered in trees, not like the South Downs, which are nude of trees, but here it's treey. And the villages are very, very pretty, aren't they? Do your festival goers and your fellow musicians, do you take them out into the hills?
Yeah, we do walks.
Oh.
So they really, they are organized walking trips. And there are also, obviously, when you're free, you can walk on your own. There's so many places to visit and to hike. We just want to find the most unique place where also outside we have the scenery of the Surrey Hills. So we never leave that site. So as audience arrives even in the car park, they can see the glorious view.
Yeah.
And then, of course, going into the venue, also there's something unique, special about it. And then, together with the best quality of music.
What did you think England would look like?
When I was a child in Shanghai, we were told Europe is great, especially the Great Britain, because the great, right? As a child, no one showed me any pictures either. So in my head, I think I imagined something like New York, perhaps, more like
Did
New
you?
York. Yeah, it's like even taller buildings, even bigger.
Because it's
Yeah,
great
everything's bigger, grander, and that all the shops were open all night long, because in Shanghai they do open until 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when you get here, it was all quiet. There
There
were
are
not even
no-
buses or tubes, in the countryside now.
And the spa closes at 7, Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't get anything I want any time of the day. So that was a big adjustment.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I think one obviously I did notice was the air. I think how much pollution I must have inhaled. This freshness of air.
Do you play in China?
Not as often.
Yeah.
I do, but not so often. Korea, Japan, still more.
Yeah. I just wondered if if you were playing in Shanghai,
So
would you choose a different program to
again,
playing in Surrey?
well, first of all, the audience there are still, we're still learning towards the Western culture of classical music. So it's tend to be still more conservative. You still tend to program Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Chopin. Here, of course, because we are so lucky, you have the greatest artists always, nearby doorstep. Therefore, one could risk much more to always add not so well-known compositions and also, same time, commission new work.
So my feeling that Shanghai is the future, actually in musical terms, the Surrey Hills is where it's at.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
Shanghai is, stuck in the past.
Yes, in classical
With
music
its-
for sure
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Because for us it was new, and through the revolution it was banned. So we had to basically start all over again after that period of time. So it takes time. But I do believe we're making good progress there as well.
This is Ranmore Church, what looks to me like a 19th century estate church made in flint, actually flint pebbles rather than napped flint, with a hexagonal tower and a spire on top, with marble columns inside, and on the columns, acorns, which shows you that this really is, they call it the cathedral in the woods. It's the size of a cathedral, a small one. We're in the woods, where I've come to meet Julia and Henry Pearson, who are part of the driving energy behind the International Music Festival, which is set in and inspired by the Surrey Hills.
Part of the festival activities includes a walk from Denby's Wine Estate, which is below us, just off the North Downs, and we're going to walk up from Denby's, up Denby's hillside, through the wine estate, past the vineyards, and in this church the walkers will settle down to hear a very young quartet of children from the Menuhin School who are going to play for us. And then we finish the walk by going back to Denby.
Gosh. First of all, you know this is England, don't you, when you're saying we stroll up through the vineyard.
I know, it looks a bit like France, doesn't it?
And when you say very young children, as a parent, my heart sinks. But when you say Yehudi Menuhin School, my heart rises again.
Exactly. Well, this is a very small, what we would call a mini concert in the heart of our major concert series in May. And it really is to enchant the walkers and to attract people to the Surrey Hills and to introduce people to the main festival season.
Is there something enchanted about these hills, do you think?
This is a magical place with the most amazing woodlands and chalk grasslands, butterflies. It's wonderful.
Do they ever play outdoors?
Oh, do they? No. These string players are a bit protective of their Stradivarius and their Cremona-made instruments. No, they don't. We have had discussions about that because, of course, lots of people hear the word festival and they assume we're performing in the middle of a field or somewhere outside. But actually, no, our festival is very much in permanent intimate venues that provide beautiful spaces for
Yeah.
classical music.
In fact, it's really quiet up here.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's almost, London is, you could almost forget it's there.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is just far enough so you don't hear anything. You may have noticed as we drove up here, there were 1 or 2 spots where you could see central London in the distance.
Yeah, I thought, hello.
35 miles away there.
Yesterday, Sunday, beautiful day, the number of people who came out from London, I guess, or from southwest London at least, and they pour up to Newlands Corner, which has still got one of the greatest views, I think, anywhere in the world. And we're lucky, we drive up and down there every day,
Yes,
and it's
yeah.
still inspiring, and you know, there's almost a spiritual feel about driving over Newlands Corner.
Is there a piece of music that you want playing as you go around Newlands Corner?
Oh, goodness.
Good bit of opera, good bit of Verdi, I think. Now that probably doesn't fit, but it would be, you know, I find Verdi very uplifting, and this is all adds to the uplift of this beautiful view.
I think I'd go for the Lark Ascending, something really cliched like that and very English.
Very local as well.
But it is very local, you know, there is that, I mean, I take your point about,
Yes.
look at this is
Yes.
Newlands Corner.
Yes, I just...
But of course, the Lark Ascending is forever associated with, you know,
Well,
Rafe and
with
Williams
England.
and
Right,
this
right.
part of the world,
yeah,
actually, yeah.
just over there, yes. Yeah.
Why is Surrey pretty? It's because the land is so bad. Before the railway, there was nothing. There's very little about Surrey in the Domesday Book. When Defoe came through for his tour of the whole island of Britain, which is 1724, he calls Surrey a desert. It was kind of this abandoned wasteland. It was near London, but it was no good to anyone because it's hills and the agricultural land is really bad and it's covered in trees. It would have also had some industry. There would have been iron, for example, and gunpowder works. You wouldn't have come here to be picturesque. The cottages survived. They're old cottages, but they look really lovely because they're really old. But my mum grew up in those sorts of places, candlelit, straw mattresses for a bed. When she grew up, they were hovels, really. And now, you know, what do you want? £1 million would buy you one. That's why it looks so pretty. And of course, since then, and the railways have come, it was the making of Surrey, because then you could live in this beautiful place and commute in an hour or so up into London. And so then people started to build in the style of the old cottages which had been here in brick and in pan tile. That's why Surrey's pretty, because until the railway came, it was one of the poorest places in England. Of course, lots of people, when they think music festivals, think, you know, huge bands up on the main stage and vast queues at the workers' beer tent, if you're going to Glastonbury, queuing up for beer, but not this festival. This festival is classical music, and I guess the drink of choice would be sparkling English white wine. And I've come to Denby's vineyard to meet Christopher White, who's the CEO of Denby's.
We are one of the largest vineyards and one of the largest single vineyard estates. There are a couple of producers who have larger acreage than us, which are split up over the southeast of England, but this is in terms of one single estate. They're growing all the time. The industry is booming at the moment, so our crown will be knocked off very, very soon.
Really? It's that good?
It really is, yes. I mean, when we first started, I'd say 30 years ago, the average size of an English vineyard was between 1 and 2 acres, and there were 400 odd vineyards. There's now over 700 vineyards, and the average acreage is over 25 acres. So it really has mushroomed in terms of the industry and the amount that's planted in the UK.
Yeah. And how much wine can you produce from?
Well, the vineyard can produce up to 750,000 bottles. In the winery, we can produce up to 1 million bottles a year. So if needs be, because we do supply a lot of supermarkets and our business is growing, we can source grapes from other vineyards in the southeast to maintain supply.
And is it like the Champagne country, or was I, it's chalk, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the reason why the vineyard was planted here is because it was pointed out to us 40 years ago, pretty much, to my father, that the North and South Downs of southern England, millions of years ago when the continent was joined to the Champagne region of France. So we have exactly the same soil structure. All the south-facing slopes capture the maximum amount of sunlight. The chalky soil gives us the nutrients we need for producing the same style of wines, but also being a fractured rock, the water permeates through the stone, so the vines don't have their roots in water, but it is a porous rock, so it can suck up the moisture it does need from the rocks.
And is it busy in the actual vineyard?
It is. It's probably one of the busiest times of the year for us.
Is it? You
it is.
Guess that as a non-expert.
It's a very manual time of year for us. We're out there pruning the vineyard, so there's 265 acres under vine. And as you can imagine, there's 400,000 vines we have out there, so we prune the whole vineyard this time of year. So not only do you prune them down back to a single or a double cane, but we also have to tine them down as well. So the actual labour we have to bring in, as well as our own staff, is quite substantial this time of year.
Where do you get skilled labour from to do
well,
that sort
again,
of work?
because the industry has mushroomed, we bring in workforce who's coming from Eastern Europe, and they work in vineyards basically, so they don't just work for us, they work for all the other vineyards in the southeast.
Gosh.
During harvest, they need over 1,000 pickers to assist with the English grape harvest. The industry has grown up very specifically on sparkling wine, which all has to be hand-picked. So as you can imagine, during that time of year, the demand for labour is huge. But it's the same team who prune our vineyard, it's the same team who pick it as well. So there's a sense of responsibility when they do prune the vines that they'll be very aware they'll be picking those grapes from those vines sort of 6 months later. So it's nice that you keep the same people on board, and it's the same sort of team we bring on year.
I think my grandparents would have been amazed to have seen a vineyard.
Yeah.
Really
That's right.
amazing.
I mean, 30 odd years ago, people, excuse the pun, thought it could have been a bit of a white elephant. My father's Adrian White, who started the vineyard. But no, it's proved over time that, climate change isn't a good thing, and there's a lot of negatives for vineyards around the world. But at the moment, with the slight change in climate, it has benefited us. We're able to grow varieties here we've never been able to grow before, able to produce really fine quality wines, which was a struggle even 30 years ago. So again, we don't want the extreme weather conditions that global warming throws at us, but there are a few benefits, and viticulture is a benefit of that in the UK.
I suffer terribly from earworms, and I've got an awful one today, which is a movie star by Harpo. And I'm going to meet Graham Dowdall, who's a sound artist and a drummer, and he played for Nico, and he plays in Pere Ubu, which, if Pere Ubu can't chase off a terrible 70s pop song, what can? Graham's been commissioned to make Soundscapes, a series of 5 sonic reactions to the landscape of the Surrey Hills.
I spent 3 or 4 hours initially on each one, field recording. I wanted to interact with the environment because field recordings only tell part of the story, really. They're very good at painting a picture of the creatures and of the weather, of the flora. I'm kind of obsessed with the minutiae of the sound world, and to sort of hear what defined each specific hill. In a hearing way, that's kind of difficult because we can look and the view's subtly different, but the sound world is even more subtly different. Some of the hills have a lot of evergreen trees, forestry plantations. They sound different when the wind blows through the pine trees from when they blow through deciduous trees, and also the bird life is different. And even the insects, and on a couple of occasions I captured some insects up close, yeah.
When you think the Surrey Hills, I don't think rock and roll, but I do think folk song and classical music, I guess, in particular. And because of Vaughan Williams collecting folk songs in this area.
Yeah.
So it's very sort of Englishy. But you played with Nico, man.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose...
That's not your background, is it?
No, I mean, I've had an interesting background that I'm a kind of Londoner with a very deep connection with the countryside. So I grew up loving Vaughan Williams, but also being drawn to the more kind of industrial, the more kind of urban sound worlds. And of course, growing up with other musics as well, because I'm not a classical musician, as you say. I work with Nico, and that sort of darker European post-industrial thing is also a strand of what drives me really sonically, yeah.
Yeah. of course, I might argue that some of this is a post-industrial landscape.
Very much a post-industrial landscape.
Abenjahammer, for example, ironworks.
Yes.
The trees are coppiced in
Yep.
order to make charcoal, to
Yep.
make iron. It's just the post-industry is a long way in the post.
It is a long way in the post.
Yeah.
I mean, on some of the hills near Reynard's Hill, there's actually one of these holloways, a sort of a path that's been worn over thousands of years, originally by the Romans, I guess coming here for the green sand or for ironwork or something like that. So it is very much a post-industrial, and it's a human-made landscape. I mean, we're looking at a lot of green fields. There is a lot of forestry.
This is the problem about being from Surrey. I was born down there. I was born in Guildford. This is absolutely... When I moved up north, they're all like, aye, from Surrey, are you? And there was a pie called Holland's Meat Pie, and the advert said, Holland's Meat Pie, too good for Surrey. and so there's this whole kind of thing about it being in this kind of deracinated, emasculated, kind of safe landscape.
Yes.
But I don't think that's...
It's a relatively safe landscape in as far as there's no huge cliffs that you could fall off when you're walking, but there are areas of wildwood. There are areas where it feels like it hasn't changed for thousands of years. Some of the places I was recording, you can see straight down into Gatwick Airport and other sort of contemporary industrial sites and stuff. So it's not I mean, we have very little natural landscape left in Britain. It's not a natural landscape, but with a lot of natural features left, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if certain music goes with certain landscape. When I lived in London, all I listened to was kind of urban R&B for about 2 years.
I suppose it does lend itself to Vaughan Williams, to that sort of classical kind of pastoral. I'm a drummer by trade. I used almost no drumming stuff at all because it didn't feel like it fitted in here. I did use wood because there's a lot of trees, and a few times I got a stick and would play on the tree to capture the sound of the oak or the sound of the ash. I mean, Surrey doesn't have a reputation for having produced enormous amounts of music other than the sort of pastoral. Obviously, Woking has the Jam, and a lot of famous rock stars came to live in Surrey, but I don't think their music really represents Surrey particularly. I guess there's Morris dancing sides around here.
That's it, I'm off.
Right, we're off. Morris dancing.
You've ruined it.
It is Morris dancing around here. I guess Abenjahammer and stuff like that would be where you'd imagine to see Morris.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, dear.
Oh, no.
You used the M word.
Yeah, the M word, Little jingly bells around it anyway. Bless them.
But the sticks, you know.
Yeah, sticks.
I mean, they have something to, you know, I think the stick stuff has something to do with this place and these kind of places. Yeah.
I think some of it actually comes from the marches and Shropshire and stuff where I live.
Yeah.
You can't move round us for the M word.
Yeah.
This is the Silent Pool. And it was regarded as a sacred site, and there's a story that wicked King John drowned a fisherman's daughter in the Silent Pool, and ever since it's been silent. Kind of a ghostly and still place, it's regarded as. There's two pools, one with an extraordinary blue colour to it, and the Silent Pool itself, which is completely transparent. And there are fish, and it almost looks as though they're flying beneath your feet. It is the dream of what clean, still water might be. It's what they call gin clear, and there's a gin distillery here now, obviously. It's hypnotic. The water is so clear, it's almost scary. And if this programme's been about the music of the Surrey Hills and the sound of the Surrey Hills, perhaps it's appropriate to come here, to this place. All right, it's not as silent as it was, is it? There's aircraft and cars, but dedicated somehow to silence and stillness, which is the place where music comes from.